Today, we're going to be talking about how we can look at two different businesses, and each are going to have the same cash flows. And we're going to wonder, why do they sell for two different prices? We'll dig into what's the quality of those cash flows. We'll look at your value canvas and how you can capture the narrative data. Secondly, we'll look at performance comparison and some key performance metrics. Those items, the information garnered from the seller interview, will help us understand the operating activities that drive financial results and give us some certainty about those. And we'll be introducing another concept called stabilized future operating performance. And we'll look at that and we'll compare that with what we might call a forecast or a projected performance. And we'll get into that. All right, so we look at this deal and we might say, okay, how should we price the value of these $166,000 worth of EBITDA? We could easily come to the most probable selling price, apply some weighting in this market approach and say, okay, we think it should sell for this. And in this case here, I decided to weight the deal on SDE, and the value of the business is $791,000. Now, the big question though is, why did I rate this at the 75th percentile instead of the 50th percentile? And while we had 791 at the 75th percentile, we have 690, $100,000 difference between rating this business as an average business or rating this business as a higher performing business. Cash flows didn't change, but my confidence in those cash flows does change. That's $100,000 of gross proceeds in the seller's pocket and a respectable amount of difference in the broker's project, right? So our question is, what supports this 75th percentile instead of this 50th percentile? And as you can see, I can click, I can up, down this performance rating, and that will generate my market multiples, which are then applied and controlled by my weighting to give me this $690,000. So my suggestion was, my assessment of this company is the 75th percentile, $791,000. Now, I can look at a few modules, and the first one that I want to look at is the performance comparison. It might suggest that this subject company is performing better than the industry midpoint and the filtered comparison group midpoint, almost as high as the comparison group high point, 15.6 versus 12.86. So that alone, I think, and in combination with other performance, they had growth, they had retraction, my ordinary business income, my operating profit, which is very similar. The difference may be in the industry regarding interest expense or other income, but we still present those two. My profit before taxes, this speaks to the total assets. We have another comparison that says fixed assets versus total assets. There's another that might talk about turnover, but here we see a return that says, okay, great. My subject company is still performing better than the industry, higher than the midpoint, and almost as high as my comparison group. These two items might reflect to me that this business could sell at a premium. I would come to my most probable selling price, and I'd start off by saying, all right, then let's move this from this 50th to the 75th percentile. Now, I haven't looked at any other things. Have I priced this too high that it doesn't support financing? We may have to take a look at that. But that's one quantitative measurement that I can quickly look at. And I want to look at one very important metric, and that is this cash conversion cycle. Because after a business has been purchased, the buyer is not going to predominantly worry about the price he or she paid for that business. The single highest area of concern that a buyer is going to ask about, worry about, be confident in is cash flow. Do I have cash? And the difference between do I have profit and do I have cash is best reflected by, if you remember Matthew McConaughey's movie called The Lincoln Lawyer, when they did not spring the motorcycle gang because, as Matthew McConaughey says, the problem is you have my money. In this case, they had not paid the attorney's retainer, so the attorney did not spring out the gang leader from jail until he got his cash. And so business owners will develop a business and they will quickly find out, probably around the 47th day, that they have profit, but they have no cash. A little advice: if you're going to make a site visit on a buyer after they have operated the business and you have underfunded the deal with a lack of working capital, be cautious about meeting up with the buyer. If they are experiencing cash flows problems and don't have working capital, they're not going to be real happy. If you want to visit that new buyer, make sure they start off with working capital. The number one reason for small business failure is lack of working capital, not because they paid too much for the business. So now what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll look at this copy project, and I want to show a difference. What I did was I increased my accounts receivables by $100,000. I arbitrarily said, what if all this profit didn't come back in cash as quickly and my accounts receivables increased to $215,000 instead of $115,000? I can quickly come to performance comparison, and I can look at my cash conversion cycle, and I'll make this bigger so everybody can see it. My cash conversion cycle went from 17, 15, 13, 16 to 43 days. It took 43 days to get my cash. The motorcycle gang has still got my cash, and they got a lot of it. And I'm experiencing the challenge of making payroll because more of my cash is in my customers' hands and not in my checking account. And that could be a problem. So if there's one performance metric beyond profitability in the profitability ratio analysis that you want to do, come to the cash conversion cycle, which is an activity ratio, and see if there have been any changes in the most recent years. And here we can say it more than doubled. It went from 16 to 43 days. And I could come back to my customer and talk about accounts receivables. I could ask them, okay, what's changed here? I don't understand. And the seller may say, well, you know what? I fired my bookkeeper, or my bookkeeper retired, and I haven't been able to replace him for an entire year, and I just can't get a handle on my accounts receivables. I don't even know who owes me money. I don't know how long they've had their bill. And because you were able to come to cash conversion cycle and see what this difference is, you're able to ask about that. And if that's the case, and if it's a recurring systemic problem, then when I come to most probable selling price, I'm not selling this deal at the 75th percentile for $791,000. I'm reducing it, and that the cost of those accounts receivables bulging and not having a cure for it may have cost this seller $150,000, $130,000, because a new buyer's going to come in here and say, you guys are bleeding cash, or like your working capital is skyrocketed. I could come back to my working capital assessment and I could look at, this company needs $138,000 of working capital. In contrast, my original company, I could look at my working capital assessment and say, when everything is happy as a clam, they only have to invest $47,000 in working capital. That's another $90,000 that the company had to fund from profits, which may have meant that the seller didn't actually take his salary because he had to fund that working capital, that extra $90,000 worth of working capital, because customers had his money. And so he didn't take a salary. I'd have to normalize it to still say that, but maybe in fact, he didn't take a salary. And maybe in fact, he mentions that in the seller interview. So the moral of the story today, the bottom line of today's story is, two businesses with the exact same profit may sell at two different levels because of the performance of the company as reflected in the balance sheet and the subject company questionnaire. And as a trusted advisor, when you understand and are able to make those understanding, you will more accurately price the business so that it's a win-win deal and set everybody up for success.